Welcome to episode 218 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm talking with Jennifer LaGarde and Darren Hudgins. They're co-authors of 2 books that help students discern fact from fiction and develop critical thinking skills and information literacy. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript, or find our Truth for Teachers podcast community on Facebook. This episode is brought to you in part by GoGuardian. Today, your classroom experience needs to be accessible from anywhere. GoGuardian Teacher with video conferencing helps you connect with your students and keep them focused wherever they're learning. GoGuardian Teacher lets you see students in real time and communicate with students through chat, audio, or video, all in a safe online environment. Now you can connect with your students and keep them focused wherever they learn. Get started today at go.goguardian.com/truth for teachers. The link is also in the show notes. I've shared a lot on the podcast recently about my own mental health journey and experiences with depression and anxiety, and I've heard from so many educators who can relate. If you are looking for support, BetterHelp can assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. It's not a crisis line or self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online, and it's available to folks worldwide. Through BetterHelp, you can connect with a licensed and accredited counselor who specializes in relationships, trauma, grief, couples counseling, teen counseling, or anything else that you or your family members need support with. You'll be able to log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor, and you'll get timely and thoughtful responses. BetterHelp is more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. Visit betterhelp.com/truth for teachers. That's betterhelp.com/truth for teachers. That link will get you 10% off your first month of services with our new sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp believes that you deserve to be happy and feel supported, and I hope you'll check out their services if you think you might benefit. So this episode is the second in my 2-part series about media literacy this season. So back in episode 216, I spoke with Peter Adams of the News Literacy Project about how educators can be informed media consumers and advocates for truth. That episode helped lay the groundwork for this one, while Peter shared some great free resources and tools to be used with students. And please do check out episode 216 to get those if you haven't already. I asked him to focus primarily on what teachers themselves need to know. We can't teach skills to students if we don't have those skills ourselves, right? Well, now that we've laid that groundwork, we're ready to do a deeper exploration into how we can support students in information literacy. So I'm speaking with Jennifer LaGarde and Darren Hudgins, who are co-authors of the book Fact versus Fiction, Teaching Critical Thinking in the Age of Fake News. That was published by ISTE in 2018. They have a new book coming out in July 2021 called Developing Digital Detectives. Jennifer, Darren, and I will talk a little bit about big picture issues like making time for instruction on digital literacy and how to teach kids to think critically about conspiracy theories when those conspiracy theories are widely believed among the community you teach in. But we'll spend the vast majority of our time talking about specific practical things that you can do with your students right now to help them be smart media consumers. This is a very natural flowing conversation, so I'm going to outline the 10 teaching tips here up front, and then you can listen for them as Jennifer and Darren talk. Here's the 10 things we'll cover. Tip 1. Teach thematically and help kids make connections between topics and subjects. Tip 2. Use mobile devices, not just computers, when having kids analyze information. Tip 3. Create learning environments that value questioning, not just finding the right answer. Guide students to understand their brains and examine bias and assumptions. Move from a checklist approach to an investigative approach for fact-checking. Teach kids to be specific about the falsehood rather than claiming, quote, fake news. Illuminate the people behind the information that's shared. Help kids analyze information not only in long-form articles, but also in the mediums they frequently consume, such as video, memes, and social media images. Teach kids how to think, not what to think. And finally, tip 10, remember that information literacy is a human problem, and even small steps to tackle it are worthwhile. Okay, let's get started. I wonder what you would say to listeners who are wondering, like, are parents actually entrusting us with this? Am I and mom and all of my colleagues, are we really equipped for this? Do we even have time to do this with all the curriculum we're expected to teach? I think these are sort of overlapping objections. Some teachers may hold all of them, some may, just hold one or two, but I'm wondering if you can address some of these issues here up front.
Well, I'm going to start at the big level and then try to work down because it's a complex problem for sure. Well, I
Yes.
mean, one of the things, and we've been talking about this for at least a decade, but I'm sure since the beginning of education is, well, what is education? What is school for?
Hmm.
And surely, when it started, it was a real factory model, and I won't go down that whole thing, but it was built to, get better workers and those kinds of things. Um, Cultures have changed, even though we may have some of our reptilian brain still controlling a lot of what's going on. The expectations of our complex and modern society today has shifted, and so school has to make a decision: do we want to create, knowledge-based factory worker, show up on time, don't really think, just pass on that I do a route thing and move it to the next person, which is also easier to test, by the way,
Hmm.
multiple choice, that kind of thing? Or do we want to create, active humans in a world like that wants to engage, that can critically think, that actually has an inquiry mental model, like a routine in their head that, like, when I am put into a situation, again, with whatever subject, right? Math, science, media literacy, social studies, like we could go even down to the importance of physical activity and play. They need to be able to mentally think about that. And so we have to make a decision locally. Do we keep these subjects in silos, or do we start to have that glue that embeds these things together, that adds that social emotional piece, and how my brain works and how I learn and what triggers me, all those things that Jennifer just spoke about. We have to first make that decision, because then I think this whole what I have to teach and I only have so much time to do it, it changes how you do that. An example that I give all the time is when I was a social studies teacher, I never got past the 1980s. Like, I would teach all this stuff, and it was like the 1980s to today never existed,
Hmm.
because I had to get through everything. If I had to go back and do it all over again, I would teach it thematically. I would have done it completely different, and I would have made not chronological things. I would have said, okay, what are themes that we can understand? How can we build mental models to then look when we run into a situation where you're having a civil or social justice or cultural revolution? What can you look at in history that you can compare and contrast that? What are similarities? What are differences? How does it rise? How does it de-escalate? Those kinds of things. And then to drive it back again to what Jennifer said is, yeah, mnemonics are easy to remember, but it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily mean you're able to put it into context of what's going on in this, ultra novelty based ADD type of internet, right? Or apps or TikTok or wherever these kids are. They have to be able to process and think, wait, is what I'm seeing, is this have credibility to it, or why are they showing me this, or just all those kinds of things. And those posters, most kids are not carrying those around in their pocket, or can easily access them. They see them maybe on the school, and of course this year we're not even, a lot of people aren't even in buildings, so they're not even seeing it at all.
Hmm. So I know that your new book that's going to be coming out soon is about helping students develop into what you call digital detectives. And I absolutely love that phrase. And I want to get into some specific examples about what teachers can do. So I would love for you to share some types of regular practices and routines that educators can begin to help kids think critically on a daily basis about what they're reading and learning.
Sure. Well, I've got two that just come to mind very quickly for me. One is more practical, and I think the other is philosophical. But one really easy thing that educators can do to move information literacy practice forward is to intentionally and regularly include mobile devices in how they teach information literacy. um, as Darren alluded to, the vast majority of people in the world get news now and for all information through a mobile device, not from a laptop or a desktop. And that those numbers skew much higher the younger our students are. We know that kids as young as gosh, fifth grade, well over half of them own their own smartphone, according to Common Sense Media. These are the tools through which kids access information. And yet at school, when we teach information literacy, we do it on a desktop and a laptop. And that's problematic for a number of reasons. One, the most glaring one is that looking for credibility markers, even looking for the source or when something was published versus when it was posted, requires different steps on a mobile device than it does on a
Mhm.
laptop or a desktop. And if we are asking kids to look for specific markers of credibility, we have to build bridges between how they do that on the devices at school versus the devices at home. Otherwise, we really don't have any hope of them applying these skills when they're not in the building. When, frankly, the research has higher stakes because parsing credibility for an assignment may have the stake of a grade, but parsing credibility out in the real world when you're making decisions about your health, about your relationships, etc., based on the information you're consuming, those stakes are much, much higher. And so, just including mobile devices, even if your school culture is such that kids are required to put their devices away during the school day, even having a center or a station that utilizes mobile devices as part of the information literacy lesson, and then having kids compare and contrast those steps, or even putting your own phone under the document camera so that you can have kids walk you through how you might locate that same information on a TikTok video versus one on YouTube in your browser. Having kids see that these skills apply in the world that they actually access information in is an important, really practical step, and frankly, pretty easy. Once you make the case for it in your school, you don't have to get everyone access to a mobile device. You don't have to allow kids to have their devices out all the time. There are ways to do it in a more controlled way if that's what the culture of your school is. So that's like the really practical thing that I think teachers can do right away. The other is a shift that sort of piggybacks on what Darren said, but I think is really critical. And that is, if we're going to create digital detectives in the future, then we have to create learning environments that ask kids to value questioning as opposed to finding the right answer. Our
Mm.
new book consists of like cases for kids to solve, since our theme is around digital detective work, but we've been really intentional about making sure that very few of those cases have a single, like, sort of static right answer. Rather, we ask kids to think about information in terms of whether or not it can be trusted enough for them to take action. And that action can be as simple as liking it, tapping the like button, or it might be tapping the share or tapping the follow button. That's an action and an endorsement that we take of information if we feel that it's trustworthy. Or that action can be as serious as making decisions about our relationships, about our health, about our citizenship. We make decisions based on information. And what we ask kids to do is to stop thinking about information in a binary of true or false, and rather think about it in a more holistic way about whether or not it's trustworthy enough to act on. So, as teachers, we have to then help guide kids in the practice of focusing more on the kinds of questions that will lead them to those determinations, as opposed to here's the answer key, here are the right answers, and that's what your goal is. So that's a harder shift because it is a movement away from the standardization that guides so much of education now. But I feel like it's absolutely critical if we really have any chance of tackling this problem.
From day one, kindergarten all the way up, we've got to start helping kids understand how their brain works and overcoming their own biases, because those biases are getting created at very young ages, even on the playground. Right? You're good, you're bad, you're this, you're that. Um, we're doing this online. We're creating characters of each other. We're making assumptions. All those kinds of things. And if we can begin to help kids understand the difference between, okay, what is a news, what is a factual news thing, and then what is an opinion, or what is somebody's hot buttons, and then how do you explain what those are? I know in like some schools they've even got it down to like, I have an upper brain and I have a lower brain, and my upper brain is, like the rational side, and my lower brain is much more of that uh, reptilian brain, right? Fight or flight, and those kinds of things. And so begin to talk through what, how am I forming these biases? Where are they coming from? And what am I doing? The last part I will say is that a digital detective goes into an environment that is not always predictable, right? It gets sent to them. It gets shared by a friend. It gets shared by a stranger. Uh, they see it on TV randomly, and they're just kind of like warped into this space. And they need to be able to understand, like, what is this doing to me? Which is no different than a regular detective who goes into a crime scene, didn't know that crime was going to happen at that moment. They take the biases that they have from the past and they connect them to what they see now in the present, and then they're able to then critically think and synthesize through those. So if we can start them thinking about that at a young age, I think those mental routines will help them going forward, especially in the things that Jennifer spoke about.
One of the things that's been is a big focus of this next book is the idea of, like we've already talked about, moving kids away from a checklist or sort of a word search, seek and find approach to information literacy, and more towards what we call investigations. One of the images that we use in the book over and over again is the idea of that detective board, with all the pieces and the clues on the board, and then they're linked together with string, etc. We use that image in an iterative way throughout the book to help educators and learners, which those two things are not mutually exclusive. Educators, of course, are learners, but help them understand that investigations of information have to be inspired by clues and driven by curiosity, right? So, in order to help prime that process for learners, we've created what we call these 4 lenses that we encourage, and all of our lessons revolve around, where we're asking kids to look at information through these 4 detective lenses. The first one is the triggers lens. The idea of thinking about how does this information make me feel? And if it doesn't trigger an emotion for me, can I see where it might be designed to trigger an emotion in someone else? It might not trigger me, but would it trigger someone else? So, and then those become red flags. If we can see, yes, this information wants me to feel angry, or it wants me to feel smarter than other people, or it wants me to dislike a certain group, that's a red flag. We stick that red flag up on the investigation board. The second lens we call access, which is related to the device that we are accessing the information on. So the question there is for learners is, does this device affect my ability to determine sort of the credibility, or look for or find the credibility markers that my teacher's asking me to look for? And 2, are there things built into this device that makes it really easy for me to act on it without thinking? Really easy for me to tap on double click the like or double click the share. Or does this device also give me access to all of the comments other people are making and all the like and share counts, which might influence whether or not I'm going to act on it. So those are our first two lenses, the triggers and the access. The third lens we call forensics and has to do with those digital clues about the source, about when it was posted, et cetera. They're like the digital fingerprints that have always been a part of information literacy, but that taken separately and in isolation are not enough to really parse credibility. And then the last lens we call motives, which has to do with getting into the mind of the potential suspect. And we want kids to utilize all four lenses to then drive their investigation. No single lens is a one and done answer to whether or not something can be trusted. Rather, the idea of the lens is it's sort of like those, old timey X-ray vision or even 3D glasses where you put it on and you might be able to see something that you don't see otherwise. We want kids of all ages to look through those lenses and spot those red flags and then let those red flags drive their investigation, right? So when we think about focusing more on the information itself, how it's created, how we're accessing it, etc., then we can help both kids and their teachers and their parents and our communities think like a fact checker, applying it to all sorts of information as opposed to discussing or debating specific issues that may be rooted in deeply held value systems that feel like an attack if you say, we're going to be talking about fake news and we're going to address this and this, rather than sort of laying those landmines that can start things off in an adversarial way. If we can develop trust with our communities around the shared goal of wanting us all to think like a fact checker and to be a digital detective, I think we have a lot more success of not only creating really meaningful lessons for kids, but also affecting the information literacy skills of our entire community, as opposed to just the kids who are sitting in front of us.
Yeah, those are some great digital detective strategies. I'm really looking forward to checking out that book when it comes out. I do also recommend your first book, which is called Fact versus Fiction: Teaching Critical Thinking in the Age of Fake News. I have checked that out recently. I know that your thinking has evolved since that time, and I know also that the media landscape and our political and societal landscape has changed since you wrote that book, because that was 2016, right?
It came out in 2018, but we started the process in 2016. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because it's not that old, but when it comes to this topic, like, man, things change really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and one of the interesting things that I've noticed in our conversations is that you intentionally avoid the phrase fake news. And I know in your second book, you do not use that phrase. So can
Mm-hmm.
you speak to why that is?
In the first book, we quoted a journalist who we both admire greatly, Tim Dickinson, who writes for Rolling Stone, who actually tweeted something that was a big inspiration to us. He tweeted to his followers that he implored them to stop using the term fake news, and rather he challenged people to be more specific. Rather than saying fake news, which he found to be lazy, he said, name what the problem is. Is it conspiracy theory? Is it the data been manipulated? Is it propaganda? Be more specific. And we took that and ran with it with his permission in the first book as a way to help both adults and younger learners talk about misinformation and talk about have conversations about information that is problematic rather than calling something fake news. If we talk about the things that are actually wrong with it, then that might help us have deeper, more positive, productive conversations. We still agree with all of that. But also in the years that followed that book, what we have found, simply to be blunt, is that the term fake news is toxic.
Yeah.
Leaders at the highest level, not only in our country, but around the world, have just used it as a way to very easily disparage any information or discredit any person or entity that shares information that doesn't coincide or align with their view. If it
Hmm.
doesn't make me look right, then it must be fake news. That is what, it's been used for. on an international stage. But what we have found in our work is that, of course, this trickles down to families and to our kids who hear it being used in the same way. So rather than try to reclaim that term, we've just moved away from it. And in our second book, we actually discuss that in the very first chapter, and that we never use the term again throughout the entire book, just because we feel like it's not helpful. So that's the first piece. But as far as then, how do you help kids identify and understand bad actors? Actually, that's one of my very favorite parts of our second book, in which we have created an entire list of what we call suspects. And we have, I mean, it gives me such joy to even think about it, because we've created these mugshots and suspect profiles. At this point, we have about 25 of these characters who have different motivations, who use different tools and tactics, who win if we take certain actions, and then lose if we take other actions. And so for kids all the way, elementary school through high school, we've created basically a variety of games and activities that kids can play with this deck of cards, these suspect cards that we've created. Everything from doing a lineup to, if this information is false, then let's do a lineup and think about which one of these suspects is most likely to have created it, to thinking about themselves and their identity as an information creator and sharer. Have they ever fallen into the trap of being one of these suspects by either unintentionally or intentionally driven by an emotion, sharing content that turned out to be false? So getting into the mind of potential bad actors, we feel like is an important step, because not only does it help you recognize their behavior, but also it sharpens your empathy skills. And having empathy for bad actors isn't about excusing their behavior, it's about understanding it so that you can take actions that are more productive and more positive than the ones they're hoping you take. So that's a big part of our second book. And when we work with kids, that's really the piece that they love the most, those lineup activities, and thinking about who might do something like this is something kids really get into.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the
Sure.
digital detectives analogy or metaphor? I love digital detectives. I love this idea of an investigation and looking for clues, a mystery.
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you can clarify what happens with the suspects and the lineup, because I'm thinking about policing. I'm thinking about the prison
Sure.
industrial complex and what sensitive topics, personal topics those are for some kids, how triggering that can be. I'm wondering
Sure.
how you handle that so that this is it's a fun mystery and it's not
Hmm.
something where we're taking those kinds of things lightly.
Sure. So, and then Darren, please add to this. But the idea for us is not about, and the way we word it in the book is not about someone being guilty of anything. Rather, it's more around this question of, if this information can't be trusted, who would do that? Who would create this false information? Who's responsible for creating it? And then who also might share it? Because kids ask that question, especially the more
Hmm.
sensational the content. If we're looking at some mystery where it's really kind of sensational and incredible, kids ask that question. Well, who would do that? Who has time to do that? Who would be motivated to do that? And so we want kids, especially as they get older, to be thinking about identity, and not
Mhm.
just the identity of those people who might be responsible for creating and sharing false content, but about their own identities as citizens. And I'm being careful not to use the term digital citizens, because to me, those things are synonymous now. We're all digital citizens. That's not different from just being a good citizen now, right? So we want kids to think about how sharing false content affects their identity, how others view them, and their own credibility in the world. So we've created these suspect cards, and they're very cartoonish, they're funny. And they allow us to think about, here's the content. Here are the red flags I see in it. Now let me look at which suspects are most likely responsible for it, And then let me think about what might be driving that, rather than a binary of some bad actor or evil henchman that's doing this. These are all behind every bot, behind every algorithm, behind every post. There's a human, and if we can understand the human condition that creates that, then I think we're more likely to be able to manage our own human behavior around it. Because ultimately, if we stop trusting and sharing misinformation that's created and spread, then they will stop creating it, because we're the product, and they need our clicks, etc. Without them, they will move on to a different product. So does that answer your
And
question?
that
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
and I will give you, and it's a perfect segue to what I was going to say, which is I'll give you a little look under the hood. Is right to Jennifer's point. This is about economics. It's about controlling people, to control what the power of finances, setting up things for other ways to get income, and income can come in a bunch of different ways. But also, one of the pieces that was an influence to this was really around economic thinking. There's a lot of components to that, and so we want to give them the tools, the ideas to kind of start building that, again, the mental model of what do I have to look for? What are those lenses?
Mhm. I'm going to add just one last thing, and that is just to piggyback on what Darren is saying, is that the lineup activities and the suspect cards, the action that's taken behind those is about managing our own behavior.
Yep.
There's nobody going to jail. There's no policing. There's no punitive. It's about managing then our actions as a result, once we sort of understand the motivations behind the suspect.
You
Mm-hmm.
have to name the persona to
Hmm.
understand what they do, and psychologically, like why they do it, and then how they impact you. And so by categorizing those groups, which well, frankly, we do that all the time with stereotyping and biases of people. We make quick assumptions. What we don't know is because they're behind this, zeros and ones, this internet space, and disguised with marketing, visuals and all these things, that it's harder to make those, decisions of whether I trust these people or not. So we're trying to bring that out into the open.
It's important to get kids thinking about what people's motivation is for writing and for sharing the things that they share. It goes beyond just point of view, but also, there are people who are sharing information for a specific reason, that some have good intentions and some don't. And I know one thing that I'm hearing a lot from particularly secondary teachers right now is concerns about their students who are being recruited online by hate groups. They are hearing that their students are being lured in by propaganda from neo Nazis and white supremacists. They're hearing some of that type of thinking happening in their classroom. And like, where did you get that? Like, oh, I watched this YouTube video that said this, or, I found this thing online.
So, these folks know that visuals matter, pictures matter, and so they're going to things like memes, which they can send you a bunch of those in a short amount of time, and begin to build that context in your brain that says, "Oh wait, they're speaking to me. Oh wait, they're speaking to me." Even though you don't really even know it, subliminally, they might be absolutely the opposite of the kind of person you want to be, but they're beginning to manipulate and build it in times where kids are trying to find out who they are, where they're going, what are they going to be. And then you tax that on with, we don't know, the kind of things that are being taught to them at home, right? And the majority of their time is home. And so if we can help these kids continue to be critical thinkers, then they make those decisions on their own. And that's not, again, manipulating one side or the other and saying we need to make them this. It's we just need to make them, critical thinkers. So when they are introduced with propaganda, whatever it is, that they're able to say, wait a minute, these people are trying to control and manipulate.
I just want to piggyback on one thing Darren said, because I think it's so important, and I don't want it to get lost in there, is that some in schools we tend to focus on specific types of information, articles, for
Yeah.
example, news articles, in terms of helping kids understand how to parse credibility when the tools that these types of groups use are what educators, old fogies like us, might consider more non traditional information sources like memes. There's been several investigations by journalists over the last couple of years about how memes are a favorite tool of white supremacist groups to
Yep.
recruit especially white males at the high school age. And so when we think about the actual platforms and the tools that these messages come in, memes, YouTube videos, etc., we have to start including those in our information literacy effort. They're a big part of our lessons in the book because if the information comes in a different shape and size that to kids when they're not in school, then the information we ask them to examine and investigate in school, then we have to assume that they're building bridges between those two things which they may or may not be doing. And when we do things like dismiss memes or YouTube or Wikipedia or other sources as just simply not being good, then that gives kids the message that the information that they're consuming in those platforms in huge, huge quantities doesn't really count because it's not real information. And so we have to legitimize those sources as being real sources of information that are worthy of scrutiny.
That's such a great point. This is not just about long form articles. So much of misinformation and so much of the information that students consume is in Instagram posts, like you said, or quick videos, could be on TikTok, could be on YouTube, as well as memes. I was just reading the other day, they were saying, maybe you know more about this, about how when text is laid over top of a photograph,
Yep.
people are far more likely to believe it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube's now the number 2 search engine in the world. Like,
Mm-hmm.
people are now trying to find information and all that through video. And I mean, we know this infodemic that came through with this pandemic. A lot of that was sent with these, TikTok videos, YouTube videos, all kinds of things of spreading all kinds of and disinformation. And it, like, so now we have a bunch of people confused about, well, is this a real pandemic, or how do I get help, or what about the shots, or vaccines, or like, just where do I go? It's a conspiracy by this group. I mean, we could go on and on and on, because again, it's been muddied.
What would you say to teachers who work in communities where false information and conspiracy theories are widely accepted? That's another question that I hear about a lot from teachers, where they feel like they want to help kids think critically. And as you said earlier, Darren, I thought your point was really great. We're not teaching kids what to think. Really, we're teaching them how to think. We're teaching them critical thinking
Yeah.
skills. But a lot of teachers feel pressure from parents to uphold conspiracy theories and other beliefs that just don't hold up under scrutiny when kids are doing that critical thinking. So, how can teachers collaborate with parents to support critical thinking for learners in spite of conflicting beliefs or ideologies?
Well, I think you answered it right there. I mean, I think the first thing is you've got to build a trust and a culture between your parents. It isn't just like, I have these kids for X amount of time, and once I shut the door, it's my classroom and I can do whatever I want, and it's us
Hmm.
against them, and all those. You've got to communicate with your parents, and it's got to be now in a bunch of different avenues. It can't just be, I sent a email home or something. You've got to find ways to, and again, talk about the video, like send a video home and say, we're going to talk about these things this week. Um, you've got to let them know ahead of time. And you also, I think, have to do a real dance of trying to give a factual both sides, not like, or even letting them know ahead of time. Okay, here are some conspiracy theories that are out there. We want you to be detectives. We want you to go through and look at these, but show them some paired text type of situations where you can see, oh, these two things look exactly the same. One is real and one's a parody, or one's a satire. Like give them opportunities, as Jennifer talked about earlier, to put them into some sort of mystery, some sort of journey where they have to parse the credibility. You're not telling them this is the one. You're not saying, like, this is the way you should be. Come up with this on your own. But you, as the teacher, have to give them the tools to be able to, what do you see? What do you wonder? What do you think about this? What questions do you still have? And then try to help them. Well, have you looked at these sources? Have you gone through these things?
Can you each share something that you wish every educator understood about teaching critical thinking?
The big thing for me is that information literacy is a human problem. It's not a technology problem. It's not a mobile device problem. It's not a social media problem. It's a human problem. The reasons we're in this mess that we're in right now are all because of human behavior, which in some ways I think sounds a little bit more nebulous than being able to just say, if we block these particular sites or we teach them how to use this device, we'll be able to fix it. But to me, that's very empowering, because if the problems are really within us, then so are the solutions. We have to be better and smarter about managing human behavior if we have a hope of helping to grow and create better humans.
This is a human problem. And the only way we're going to deal with it is not act like it's too big. We have to start biting off chunks of it. And we hope we did that in the first book. We hope we're going to help you even more in the second book. We just doing podcasts like this with you, Angela, and spreading the word. We hope that we're helping folks do that as well.